Welcome inside this special edition of the Fast Lane. Trey Lyle here with you, previewing a very interesting and very dynamic matchup, is to put it lightly, between Ole Miss and the traveling Liberty Flames. Joining me, he is on the beat for Ole Miss for the Clarion Ledger, part of USA Today, Nick Suss. And Nick, let's jump right into it. I guess there's two major headlines, kind of storylines heading into this game. The first obviously has to be the return of Hugh Freeze coming
Yeah.
in. Obviously, not a lot of players were part of the Hugh Freeze era now, with enough turnover over time. But how has fans or kind of just the team kind of reacted to the return of a coach who brought a lot of success to this team, beating Alabama, but his exit was very infamous, just to say the least.
Yeah. As you kind of alluded to, I think there are only 7 or 8 players left on this team who played for or were signed to Ole Miss by Hugh Freeze. Only one who played for him in the case of cornerback Jalen Jones, because this is his 6th season. But from the inside, from the coaching staff, from the players, really not much of a focus put on Hugh this week because of how long ago that is in college football time. 5 years is an eternity in college football time. From the fans, from the administration, from people who were here and endured what the Hugh Freeze era was like, and more specifically what the ending was like, obviously there's going to be some conflicted feelings. He's a guy who in 2014 and 2015 led Ole Miss to 19 wins in 2 years, which is the most that any coach had in a 2-year span since 1961-62, I believe. From 2016 to 2019, Ole Miss had 19 players drafted into the NFL, which is the most in a 4-year span since Archie Manning was part of the draft. I mean, it's been a long, long time since somebody had the level of success and notoriety on the field and as a recruiter that Hugh Freeze did, but it's also impossible to ignore the state he left the program in, with years of recruiting sanctions and bowl bans and financial penalties, and just the intense level of scrutiny that was put on Ole Miss for 3 years or so, of every single move being monitored by the NCAA because of the infractions that were alleged to have taken place, and some of them have been proven to have taken place. So all of that said, I think there are a lot of fans who are excited to see him just because of the happy memories he represents. And I'm sure there are some people, particularly some of the younger fans, who maybe weren't as invested then, but were definitely disappointed in the fallout years, might meet him with some resignation. It'll be interesting to see, but I do think that the second storyline we're going to hit on is going to be far more fascinating when the gameplay begins than the first one.
Yeah, this is like maybe the first game all season where you see, this might be the best quarterback matchup we have in the country all season, when we have probably maybe the top two quarterbacks taken in the next draft, and Matt Corral and Malik Willis. Lane Kiffin talked about in his press conference, I read, that 22 NFL teams will be here
Yeah.
with, multiple GMs. So this is definitely, even though it's kind of tucked away in the noon SEC network slot, this is from maybe even bigger of a game from the NFL view than the college view, because you have two, great quarterbacks that are going to go early in the NFL draft.
Yeah, I think both of them are still guys that have something to prove. I mean, if you compare this to last year in the college football playoff when Trevor Lawrence faced off against Justin Fields, those are two guys that have been christened as future first round picks since they were 16 years old. For Matt Corral, there was a point when that was thought to be a possibility, but he really didn't surface back into the discussion until about 2 months ago. And for Malik Willis, with the serpentine route that he's ended up taking to the top of draft boards, this has definitely been a surprise for a lot of forecasters there. I'm excited to see this quarterback matchup. I think both of them are guys that need to prove something, whether it's Corral playing with a completely depleted offense around him. Will he be able to produce with himself on a bad ankle without his top 3 receivers? Can he put up gaudy numbers against a group of 5 defense, which is expected of a quarterback like him? Or will the limitations put on him prove to be too much, which is kind of a good test for a NFL team, say the Detroit Lions or the Houston Texans, who don't have that great of a surrounding cast right now? How will he perform against overmatched competition? For Malik Willis, it's obviously the question of, well, how does he do against this Power 5 opponent? If you look back through the history of the last 10 NFL drafts, there are 8 instances where a non-Power 5 quarterback played against a Power 5 team the year before he was drafted. The last time one of those guys won was Paxton Lynch at Memphis in 2015, coincidentally beating Hugh Freeze and Ole Miss. So that's a fun little connection there. But yeah, the recent history, guys like Josh Allen, and I'm blanking on who was more, and Jordan Love at Utah State, both struggled pretty heavily in these games. Can Malik Willis kind of reverse that trend and show his mobility, which has been something that Ole Miss struggled with this year, especially bringing down Bryce Young and bringing down Bo Nix, two extremely slippery quarterbacks in the backfield. With this Ole Miss pass rush being as aggressive as it is, can Malik Willis kind of show off his skill set and do a lot of different things there? I think both of these guys are really, really intriguing prospects. But the one knock on them is definitely something that will be able to be explored this weekend.
Yeah, and Malik has already played multiple Power 5 opponents. Not an SEC defense, but he has played the NC States of the world, Virginia Tech, and Syracuse. And I will add the Philadelphia Eagles should be thrown in there as an Eagles fan. Their quarterback situation is very fluid as they are the quarterback factory, of course. But you talked about the Liberty defense. This is statistically one of the better defenses in the country with a very good pass defense and injuries issues for Ole Miss. Matt Corral's been banged up. You talked about the missing weapons. So what do you expect that Ole Miss will have on the field come that game, and how can they match up with a really good Liberty secondary?
I will let you in on a little secret, which is that Lane Kiffin will only talk explicitly about injuries if it benefits him. So he's been talking a lot. He's been talking a lot this week about injuries, and he might be doing the same thing he did 2 weeks ago and playing them up a little bit to make expectations a little bit different. I would say, realistically, Corral's probably going to be playing with 4 of his 5 regular offensive linemen and a full arsenal of running backs. The receiving corps is, at best, one of the 3 best receivers are going to play. I don't expect very much there, but heavy dose of rushing attack. And if you are basing this game purely on what Syracuse was able to do to Liberty, Ole Miss should be able to have a similar amount of success running downhill with a quarterback who can move and a lot of talented running backs who can move. Ole Miss doesn't have one player like Sean Tucker, but they do have 3 running backs who have been highly productive at times this year. Questions about the interior offensive line with injuries. The starting right guard's out for the year. The left guard and the center are both banged up, and that forced them to move positions around a little bit last week. But I would think that just based off of the way Liberty plays in the secondary and based off of the dearth of weapons that Ole Miss is going to end up having, expect a very run-heavy attack. We'll see how involved Corral can be in that attack with his ankle, but pay attention to guys like Henry Parrish, Jerrion Ely, Snoop Connor at running back, and then guys like Ja'Cour Pierce and John Rice Plumlee at receiver who can run in motion and kind of do those jet sweeps and shovel passes as an extension of the running game.
And obviously another team, ULM, University of Louisiana Monroe, ironically, the OC is Rich Rodriguez, who was the OC at Ole Miss, is the last stop. So, and they had a lot of success with the quarterback run and using kind of their run game to beat the Liberty Flames. So you touched on that. Going to the other side, Ole Miss defense has been up and down, to say the least. It is leaps and bounds better than what it was last year. But how do you feel they're going to be able to, contain a guy like Malik Willis, where they've had, their struggles against, I would argue, similar quarterbacks, but not with Malik's just raw talent?
The good news, if you're from the Ole Miss side on this, is the way that Ole Miss really shut down Malik Cunningham at Louisville, who's probably the most dynamic running quarterback in the country, if that isn't Malik Willis. They really did hold him pretty much to nothing through 3 quarters. And then when the score got away in the 4th quarter, Malik Cunningham started putting up some numbers. But what I'm going to pay attention to is, for all of Liberty's strengths, one of Liberty's weakness this year has been pass protection, has been letting Malik Willis take some hits. And this Ole Miss defense has been stellar when it comes to pass rush this year. Top 15 in the country in sacks per game, number 2 in the SEC in sacks per game, behind only Georgia. A really good pass rush unit. And they've really only been blitzing 3 guys at a time. They run a 3-2-6, and they tend to drop 8 almost every play, which allows you to have a linebacker like Chance Campbell or Mark Robinson kind of spying the quarterback and making sure if he rolls out and tries to come upfield, you can sack him for a 0-yard loss, but still get him down behind the line of scrimmage that way. That's going to be something really fascinating to watch. But I will say, from the flip side of it, Ole Miss's defense really isn't built to stop the run on first and second down. Auburn had a lot of success. Alabama had a lot of success. And Arkansas had a heck ton of a lot of success running the ball on first down, setting up 2nd and 4, and having its entire offensive arsenal available on 2nd and 3rd downs. And that's something that Liberty should be able to do. If you can establish the run early, set up 2nd and short, 3rd and short, you can set up some long drives and keep this Ole Miss defense on skates. And then in the occasions that you do need to throw deep on short down distances where you can take a shot, or long distances where you need a conversion, this is a bit of a grabby team, number 1 in the country in penalties per game. And a lot of that comes from defensive pass interference, defensive holding. So if you take your shots and expect Ole Miss to over-aggress, that is a possibility for sure.
And you kind of touched on that. Hugh Freeze is kind of in these bigger games been known to kind of slow his offense down. He did it last year, against Virginia Tech, and he did it against Syracuse this year, despite the loss. Do you expect more of that for Liberty, just trying to, take advantage of the weaknesses of the Ole Miss defense? And to add to that, how efficient does that mean that the Ole Miss offense needs to be, given maybe the limited possessions?
Yeah, we'll see about limited possessions, because the one thing about Ole Miss's offense is they go fast. Even with recent injuries, they're still averaging 79.5 plays per game this year. No matter what's going to happen, they're going to move as fast as possible. So their possessions can go 13 plays, 3.5 minutes, and it seems pretty normal. But on the other side, yeah, I do think that it will behoove Liberty to slow things down. And I think that if that is something that's documented that Freeze likes to do in these big games, I think they're going to go back to that well, especially given the success that Auburn had last week. Flip side of that, though, if you look at what tempo has done to Ole Miss this year, Arkansas in particular ran almost 100 plays and put up 51 points. You can beat this defense in different ways. It's not about playing slow or deliberate. It's about playing efficiently. It's about averaging the right number of yards per play. It's about calling the right plays against the right defenses. And given the way this Ole Miss defense plays, especially against spread offenses where you're going to have 3 defensive linemen and 2 linebackers on the field almost every play, you're going to have a matchup advantage of 5-on-5, 5 blockers against 5 defenders. If all of your blockers seal off the lane, you should be able to get into the secondary and force them to make a tackle 7 yards downfield. And that's a win on first down. That's always a win on first down, to get 6 or 7 yards. So the speed of the game doesn't matter too much. But what will be fascinating is seeing how they can take advantage of these one-on-one opportunities. And if they, as a group of 5 team, as an independent team, can win these one-on-one matchups against what should theoretically be the more talented group from the Power 5.
Well, Nick, spread in that game is, minus 9.5 for Ole Miss and over under 67.5. Are you leaning any way in this one? Do you think it stays close, or do you think Ole Miss kind of is going to be able to pull away?
If Ole Miss pulls away, it's going to happen early, not late. I don't think this is a team that is right now, with all of its injuries, built to withstand a close first half and pull away in the second half. It's going to have to be like the games against Louisville and Tulane, and especially Austin Peay, obviously, where they put up huge numbers in the first and second quarter and kind of coast when the other team gets out of its game plan. I expect to see a very run-heavy approach from Ole Miss that works, just given the way ULM was able to run, given the way Syracuse was able to run. I do think that's something that will be replicated. Ole Miss has the number 3 rushing attack in the country behind Air Force and Army. Whenever you're putting up numbers comparable to service academies, you're doing something right. So I do think that's something that'll be achieved, but I've made this joke on every radio appearance I've done for 6 months now. This Ole Miss defense has improved, but they could throw 12 shutouts in a row, and in game 13, I'd still think they'd be capable of giving up 500 yards and 40 points. I just don't know what to expect after a team for 5 years was one of the 5 worst defenses in the Power 5 just about every time. it's still hard to get a read on exactly who they are and what they're going to be. So especially when you're going against a quarterback as talented as Malik Willis, and especially when you are a team that is going to be asked to do more than ever before with the injuries on offense, I don't know what sort of a defensive performance we're going to see.
Well, Nick, one more question for you before I let you go. How many bags of popcorn do you think we should prepare for this game?
I've got one of those big tubs of popcorn, those fall tubs.
Yeah.
My mom sent me one a couple of weeks ago. It's half caramel corn and half
those are the best.
Butter popcorn. And it has been such a bad thing for my diet for the last 2 weeks. But I can bring that if anybody needs some. And if you guys just bring a couple of normal bags of movie theater popcorn, we should be covered.
All right. Well, we'll save some for Lane Kiffin too. Nick, how can our listeners, if they want to learn more about Ole Miss, connect with you online?
Yeah, clarionledger.com, clarionledger.com is where you can find a hub of all of my stories. I've got some cool stories up this week about Hugh Freeze and his Ole Miss connections, about Malik Willis and Matt Corral, about all this game. You can read that. You can follow me on Twitter at Nick Suss. That's NICKSUSS. If you want to hear my musings about football fun facts and random minutia that crosses my mind. And if you're in Oxford this weekend, look for me. I'm the person who looks like this. And if you wave, I'll wave back.
Well, Nick, thank you so much for joining me for this special edition of the Fast Lane.
Yeah, happy to help, buddy.
As always, you can connect with me at TreeLileVT and on Fastlane at Lane, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Thank you so much for listening to this special edition of the Fast Lane.